I recognize you. Hello, Chris.
Oh,
How are you?
just striptease getting in.
I don't have any credits. I'm not sure how we can do the striptease.
I just realized my room looks much classier if you just get the fancy light.
That's true.
That gives a very false impression of this room. That's just this background, really. One spray can too many.
So this is the roof of this room.
Ooh, that's odd.
You've seen this lamp before, right?
Oh yes, it just looks very strange from that angle. It looked like a 90s alien special effect where they just couldn't do very bad 3D rendering.
This is true.
Oh, it's my new painting lamp, by the way, which puts the old one to shame. And is I can't remember exactly what spec it is. Oh yeah, it's 88 daylight LEDs. You know, so do not look directly at it.
Oh, that's very good.
Can't really do justice, but it does make quite a big difference. And people, older people, have recommended it strongly for quality of life painting with working eyes and things. And mine aren't yet, but they will eventually. This is a known error condition. Excuse me. No one else is on the call.
Yeah, people too tend to enter at random times. So
Yes, I've kind of blocked this one out today. I don't know, I don't usually, but you said specifically this one, so I have.
yeah, there will be people there.
Tidying away the spray paints. I don't like using spray paints, but I haven't got the hang of not. I need to learn how to use an airbrush primer so I can do it without having battle cans. Which is on my to-do list, but
You're funny. Oh, hang on. I saw Fabian was coming in, and then I'm not sure if it's here or not.
I see a Fabian.
He's here. Hello.
Fantastic.
I look very pious because I've got the camera lower than the monitor. So every time I look at people, it looks like I'm sort of praying for divine guidance or something.
Fair enough.
Good morning.
Morning. So Chris is here today. Fabian, have you met Chris? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
Since everyone else knows everyone else, including whoever else may come on the call, could you guys briefly introduce each other to each other?
Sure.
Like,
Want to start?
Yeah, I know Frode because I once started a PhD that was quite similar to his PhD, not identical. It didn't go in the same direction, I think, but the ideas of the starting points and what makes us angry is quite similar. And he did better with his PhD than me. I eventually gave up in disgust because it was about studying digitally augmented scholarly communication. And I discovered I really hate reading and writing research papers, which does not make you a good PhD student. But my actual day job, I'm a research programmer for the University of Southampton, my Frode was studying, and my big things I've worked on were open access research repositories and open data, so RDF, semantic web and things like that. But as a programmer, not a researcher. So I'm a doer rather than I was like, can I actually make this thing work? And you, Fabian?
It's a bit similar in terms of mindset. I'm a prototypist. So I like new thoughts, and I definitely need research to eat good ideas, discover new ideas. But in the end, I need to challenge these by trying to build something and see those ideas being the aesthetics or being beautiful behind that, if we can actually build something out of it. my motivation for this and VR also, because I focus on VR and AR on the web, to be specific, is because I have a bunch of notes on any topic for how many times I went or did not go actually to the swimming pool, to philosophy, to anything really, languages, programming languages. But they are stuck behind that thin screen in front of us, and it doesn't feel right. I want to be able to pull them out of the screen, to have post-it notes on them, to throw them in the air or toss them on the floor, and then be able to find structure behind those hidden connections. So I've been working on building prototype for organizing my notes in VR, and AR, and any kind of like spatial way to organize information. And through that, I had quite a few discussions also with Brandel. And then Brandel told me that this group was the place to be. So that's how
we certainly have the passion. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I don't remember if he said that word for word, but that was the meaning for sure.
Yes, yeah, me and Fred did a project on spatial thinking and trying to put ideas out in 2D space, and doing the novel thing with drag to open links. So instead of clicking to open something and it appearing somewhere, you drag it and drop it where you wanted it, and the link would remain as a link to where it came from. And then I got bored and did other things, and Fred got annoyed because he wanted me to do more on it. Frustrated, not annoyed.
Okay, two things. Brandel suggested this book. You all have it, right? It's pretty useful. Chris, I think you would like it for sure. Now, one thing that Fabian wanted us to discuss, which I completely agree with, we should spend some time on, is what text is. But first of all, I think we should talk about what virtual reality versus augmented reality is, because I'd like to know if you guys agree with me on the basic premise that the only difference between AR and VR is time. The reason I say that is because even today with an Oculus, once you set up a Guardian space, if you go through that, the renderings of what is beyond it appears. So it's not fully enclosed anyway. So I think that as hardware gets better, you will be able to toggle more easily between AR and VR. So it's kind of a early phrase, and therefore I don't really care. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I think that VR is more important. Some people think AR is more important, and that's just such a small difference. Any comments or thoughts on that?
So technically speaking, for sure, you can do VR, you can do AR in VR, for example, with a Quest, but other headset like Varjo. So the one thing though that is a bit beyond that is room understanding, or how the headset would know that a table is a table. And that part, as far as I can tell, is not solved. It doesn't mean it won't be solved in 5 or 10 years, but to do it in real time, or that, for example, a golden frame is a golden frame, or then you can pick that frame and move it around. So far, I haven't seen anybody do it. There are a lot of tricks, but to do it fully in real time, and that's going to make a big difference instead of not just being a background, basically, that you can't really interact with.
I've seen 2 very good tricks for that. They were both tricks, but so I'm not sure if they were counted into that category. But the Vive, we did a project, some postgrads, peers of Frode, maybe a couple of years before his time, played with the Vive and literally gaffer taped the controllers to a keyboard and table and a chair, I think, in a room. And I did have the experience of walking up to a VR chair in VR and picking it up, and it being a real thing in front of me, which was very much the bare bones. And and then they had a controller on the front that could 3D map your hands into the world. So you held your hands up like in Lawnmower Man, and you actually saw them, which was kind of cool. To give your hands actually appeared, but also where it fell downwards, they tried to have it so you typed on the keyboard and the keys went up and down on the key mat, and they couldn't quite get the resolution so that it actually.
So if this was a spy movie, this is where you've been outed as a spy, Chris, because the hand mapping and keyboard thing in Oculus is flawless now.
Right.
That's one of those things that's been solved. So that means you haven't been in recently, so naughty boy. Anyway.
But also the other thing I saw was the one from Silicon Valley that narrows it down, which is the lab up in Oakland, I think it was, that has is doing things in the real world by projecting onto sheets of paper and things. And they were just identifying items and their rotation and position by colored dots. And it's not perfect, but using something instead of trying to get the computer to map the perfect things, as a compromise to getting the tech better, it's easy to get a computer to identify a known shape if you've got a color and dot pattern. Yeah, knowing that unique pattern rotated and mutated like this should be pretty easy.
Yeah. That work is all interesting. But anyway, let's go into, since there's
before we get started, I'd like to give you a micro demo of my first baby steps into VR, integrating the Babylon JS 3D library with the IMBA programming language I've been using for all of my research.
Okay, let's have a look.
Share my screen for a second.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see, where is the correct window? All right, this should do it.
Hi, Bob.
Okay, can you see?
Can see, yeah.
Okay, so there it is.
Cool.
And the code is relatively elegant. I have it set up so that the different basic shapes that the library supports will be represented as custom tags / web components, and it'll be able to build that up. So right now, the actual source code for that, I will paste into the chat. I can stop sharing now. That was just to show you that it does actually work.
Yeah, I wonder what the repercussions of that will be. Very interesting.
So I will paste just a tiny little bit of code to give you a feel for that in the chat window now.
Thank you.
And then I will show you code for one of the basic shapes, just a box shape, pasting that in. And then for our main content that you actually see in the window, it just consists of so it's very clean and painless to work with. We'll see whether the other library features integrated smoothly as the basic drawing a couple cubes.
Yeah, that's very, very cute, very cool. We have to come back to that properly, I think. Yeah, definitely. So the two major things on the agenda. First one is what we think text is. And just separately with Fabian this weekend, I've just said that to me, I don't actually care anymore. I care mostly about working in VR. That's what's crucially important. However, not social, not gaming, and not just imagery by itself. But I think that really does cover everything. Fabian, yes, thanks for the link to Dynamic Land. That's exactly what Chris was talking about. Anyone else want to talk about how they see text now in relation to what we're all doing together and so on?
So I'm happy to jump in because I provoke this a bit. And because to me, and it's strange that you say that you're more interested in VR now, in the sense that I came to this group for text. But I don't know what text is anymore. And that's some of the questions we had about how do we capture the video? Is the video of our discussion, even without yet being becoming text, either through machine learning or through a human? Because we know it will be text. Is it like potential text or text that will be? So I'm asking the question also because I'm not sure what it is anymore. I don't want to mix it, let's say, with information or with knowledge, but I don't think it's fair especially if we explore more and more VR or other medium, or the mural, for example, from Bob, to say that it's text, or maybe not to say that it's not text, because if we just say it's a bunch of letters or characters stuck together, then we haven't been doing that for a while, which I personally don't mind, but it's a little bit awkward. And I think for people who are curious about augmented text or about this group, at least I believe that that has to be clarified, because otherwise it means we might be confusing. It doesn't mean we're confused or we don't dig what's the most interesting. And I believe we are digging what's most interesting, but that defining what text is beyond letters or characters stuck together would be valuable. In my opinion, what it might be, and I'm saying this completely candidly, I did not take the time to think it through, but it's a piece of information that we have affordance on, so we can manipulate it. It might be copy pasting, might be reading, might be annotating through post-it notes or whatever. So that's a bit how I see text. And of course, because we can put in text a rich text or even web-based, it's text that can also include animates, that can include any other medium in it. But as long as it has those properties of being manipulable, to me at least, that's what I would put as text.
Is this a seriously raised question, and is the group serious about defining it? If it is, then we have to decide on what level and what domain or context we're talking about. And probably we're, from what I've been hearing, we're using the word text for about, in the order of 20 to 75 different concepts. And we use the same word, T-E-X-T, for them. And we're going to go around and around and around with this sort of sloppy definitional talk unless we get serious about defining different aspects of it. It doesn't mean you have to define all of it, but you do have to define serious pieces of it or domains of it and have names for them. Otherwise, we're going to go round and around. We'll be having this discussion 6 months from now and 3 years from now.
I hope
That's my view.
I hope we will have the discussion 3 months from now and 6 years from now, because I
will not be joining it, because unless you're serious about doing some serious defining.
So Bob, and I see Peter, I see you have your hand up. The thing is, this is the kind of thing that is useful, I think, to consider from different perspectives. But right now, this group is about the journey between virtual reality and traditional, back and forth, because I think it's important. I think it's the most important question for humanity right now, because it can help us understand things like climate crisis. It can help us deal with other things. It's an augmentation opportunity. So I completely agree with you, Bob, on the premise of your question. And if you asked me this before Christmas, I would have just shut up and agreed with you without any qualifications. But in the context of here, every once in a while, to have this discussion in a sloppy way, try to make it more rigorous, but just in order to broaden our brains, rather than to kind of narrow them down, I think is a good idea, because after we've gone through this discussion, we're going to be talking about Egyptian history, which of course, a lot of it is non-textual, a lot of it is textual. And I think that, I don't know, first of all, guys, have you had a chance to read the document I sent, the one on the Egyptian Museum? Okay, we'll go through a little bit of that now in this chat, because it is very, very relevant to this. But anyway, that was just a little bit back to you, Bob and Peter.
Which of us first?
Which Peter? Peter.
Okay. To to my mind, we can describe text as being a linear sequence of symbols drawn from some alphabet, which can contain overlapping subsequences out of the original sequence, and those subsequences themselves can be parsable by or more grammars. So to my mind, it's the key of having a sequence of symbols and an associated grammar that's used to parse and define their meaning. And that allows you to have one sequence of symbols, which could be parsable in multiple grammars, and it can also have multiple subsequences in a stream of text parsable through different grammars. So I think that's the key, having that bridge between the subsequences and the grammars used to analyze them.
I would agree with you to a very high degree, Peter, but then it becomes the interesting thing of paratexts and aspects of it. For instance, when you text between two iOS devices today, fortunately it doesn't work between Windows and iOS, you can tap on the message and choose to do a thumbs up or a heart, etc., that's glued to that message as a reply. That doesn't actually fulfill many of those things. And again, Peter, I agree with you that that's what text is. So these extra textual elements become more and more important. And when we start putting text on a mural and having red lines going between textual elements, like in a TV murder wall, those lines become part of the interpretation, value, context, and meaning of that text. So that's why it's so exciting to look at exactly what you said, Peter, where again, third time, I agree with you, but the layers on top of it becomes very much part of the actual text itself, even more maybe than the typeface it may be rendered in.
Okay, in that case, I would amend my definition to have the subsequences associated with grammar and other metadata. And the other metadata could include paratext that are linked into it, VR attributes, and anything else. But the key, again, to my mind, is being able to take, and also, I'd also amend that to say that the sequences don't necessarily have to be contiguous. So you could have a composite sequence that consists of, the first 5 paragraphs and first 5 elements, and then maybe 16 symbols at a given offset, and connect that, and then have an external block of metadata associated with that sequence of that set of sequences. So yeah, I think we can get a common model out of it.
Then let's call that a different name. Let's call that text with metadata, or something you want to make up, so that it distinguish it from the first definition that you gave, which was a linguistics one, and from the field of linguistics. I don't know if we got any in the meeting right now, but that's, so we've got 2 different meanings now. Can we call them by 2 different names, or are we going to confuse ourselves by calling them all text over and over again?
I think we have to remember that the reason we're having this discussion today, we're not having a specific meeting on the philosophy of what text is in isolation. We're having it in this community, and Fabienne brought it up, as I understand, to find out, are we still about text? What is this community about? It is actually called the Future Text Lab, which is, one thing. So the thing is, I hope Mark Anderson will join us. He may get the time wrong. I see Alan is coming in, which is good. Adam Wern is coming in. He thought it was the other time. So I sent out 2 documents to the community this week. One of them was the intent of the lab, which you really need to have a look at and tell me if you want to be included or not. Because if I don't have an email back saying, yes, please, then I won't do it, because I don't want to be pushy. And I've been asked by Ismail to give a list now. Some of you have said yes, so that's good. The other one was a document on the new Egyptian museum. And Fabienne, can I transition to that now and see how it holds in context with your big question? Okay, cool. So the thing with that is, Brandel can't be here today. He has a conference he has to go to. But, he's the one who turned my head on this. And I remember Doug saying that someone said, Doug, you're just a dreamer. And he said, dreaming is hard work. The difference between a fantasy and a dream is that a dream attempts to achieve something beyond linear obviousness that can be turned into a reality, whereas fantasy exists on its own, which is, where we have fantasy movies and books and so on. So in this context, what I tried to do over the weekend, so my good friend Ismail Sarageldin, who was the founder of the Modern Library of Alexandria, former vice president of the World Bank. He has 50 honorary degrees. In other words, very academic, very connected, and a super, super nice uncle to my son, Edgar. He said that they are now building the world's largest archaeological museum in Egypt. It's going to be within a mile of the Great Pyramids of Giza. And he says that based on the first document I sent, we should consider as a community to pitch to develop some kind of an AR or VR thing for them. He said no more. So I wrote this document that I sent around, trying to really just be a bit thought-provoking. I will read out a few highlights from it. Actually, yeah, I think right. I think Adam's trying to come in. So no, I'm not going to do that. It's a bit too artificial. Alan, are you here, by the way?
I am. If you could, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audioed.
Yes, I'm calling from my phone.
Okay, no, that's fine. Right. So here's the idea. You're standing outside when you put, okay, wherever you are in the world, you put on your Oculus, let's make it simple, stay with the Oculus headset. And then you see yourself standing outside this Egyptian museum, which is absolutely beautiful, the physical building on the outside. And then you step in. And of course, you can walk around the museum and look at things as though you're there. It's kind of an obvious implementation of VR. You can then also choose to take any object you come across into the augmented room. I call it the augmented room to be both VR and all of them. And in this room, this is where it gets really interesting, because in our community, we have discussed now over the last few weeks, where do we put stuff? So the first thing that this person will notice going into this room, this is just in my thought scenario, please, none of this is dictating. I'm just going to pretend it exists, right? See this huge timeline in front of them, which is very much like a mural. Adam's coming in. Let's just wait a second. Hi, Adam. So I was just about to do a little verbal explanation of what's in the Egyptian Museum document that I sent. So you're in this augmented room, and in front of you is a huge timeline mural. And in this, and now I'm already taking a lot of the stuff that the people in the community here has built. So you have, first of all, the gamut is about 3,500 years of Egyptian history. But what you can do, you can fold it in different ways, like we've seen, in the Twitter thread. The different layers are different subjects. So you can choose to have even the weather or fashion, or when they built pyramids or dynasties or names, whatever. Each have different threads. If there's something you don't find interesting, you pinch it and you throw it on the floor. It now becomes gray and it goes to the bottom. So it becomes really interactive. And a really key thing for this community is you can zoom out in either direction outside of this gamut, because I'm not interested in making a ghetto. I used to think of CD-ROMs as being information ghettos. We should not make VR ghettos. So this has to be fully integrated with open access, Wikidata, Wikipedia, and so on. So if you want to scroll all the way back to where the African plate hit the European plate and basically pushed Egypt into existence, you should be able to do that. Right? So all of these are issues that we've discussed many times. So that's one of the things. Another thing is there will be a mural, not a mural, what do you call it? A diorama. So there's a table that has one of the pyramids and it has the center where you're in. And then you find out that obviously you can make it smaller, bigger. If you make it big enough, suddenly you're inside one of the pyramids, you walk around, you make it small and you can see the entire globe. You can scale things, you can move them around, you can do all these things. So the interesting thing then becomes you can touch, let's say, one of the pyramids and throw it against the timeline. And then because every item here has to know what they are, it will then highlight the history of that pyramid. So similarly, anything on the timeline, you can throw it, because I'm thinking throwing is a bit like drag and drop in this environment. It's not a nice word, throwing, but that's how I'm thinking about it. So you can do things back and forth, and then you can save these environments. You can open up academic documents. Let's say you're a university student, read the document in kind of the ways we have already been talking about. And hopefully, if we work on the architecture of how things are described, you can open up, let's say, 3 documents. All the pictures go up here on a specific wall, and then you can start doing connections again, right? One of the fun things I thought about was that in this timeline, there are a few places there are thin slits like doors. And if you walk through that, you enter a computer game metaverse for that time period. So that's very much outside the work that we are doing. But imagine that some of these companies that have made amazing computer games for Egypt, that they donate lots of resources. So just imagine for fun, you know, you have this mural in front of your timeline, you walk through it and suddenly you are there. And ideally, the things you come across, if it's an object that is in the museum, you can pick it up and take it back in with you. So this is...
Take it back with you into the main museum? How?
Oh,
With glass, Oculus?
No, well, this is all Oculus headset. This is all virtual reality. It's all right. So you
Okay,
go in.
all right.
So the thing is, for this piece, I'm not trying to be realistic. I'm not trying to think of text. I'm trying to think of how different things can be put together. And immediately, when talking to Ismail about this, he said that might be problematic because if they have specific scans of specific objects, the intellectual property comes into it of what knowledge they would want you to take out of the museum. Because one thing could be you find a specific jewel and it has maybe a gemstone on it. And if that is, let's say, well, anyway, if the museum knows the composition of the stones on this, these are knowledge objects. So you should be able to throw that on the map. And then it'll zoom out and show these are the possible locations this could have come from. Right. So obviously I'm talking crazy levels of system understanding of multiple things. But it's kind of just to kick off a little bit of thinking so we can see if any of this is doable. And then, of course, at the end of this session, in this script, the user kind of stores a few views of this, lots of things happening, folds it down, goes into a meeting in another room made by another company, and is still able to open up and show an aspect of this, maybe not everything.
It's a beautiful vision. Well, and we should, and I think we should do it. I've known Ismail not very well. I went to a conference there 6 or 7 years ago at the museum. And even then he had a virtual reality room.
Yeah,
Plato.
A cave, that's right.
A cave, yeah, right, a cave, which I had the opportunity of walking around in there in Egypt rather than at the University of Illinois. So he's a good guy and a serious guy, and Egypt is putting money behind this, and I think we should make a plan and go for it. It's a beautiful vision. I love throwing a pyramid.
Thank you, Peter, and then Fabian. But just really briefly, I looked at the budget for this. The physical budget is $500 million. I don't think they have a lot of money, if any, for us. But I do think that if we present something coherent in a way that these organizers can understand, then we should be able to get sponsors. I mean, who wouldn't want to be involved with, the greatest museum in the world in a virtual reality space that isn't just Second Life? Peter.
It's one of the things I'd like to be able to do is pick up an artifact and throw it at a globe of the Earth, and then see on the globe a line showing all of the locations that artifact had been over time since the point of its discovery. And when I might notice, say I pick up a bracelet and I throw it at the globe, and I notice that the line races out and it hits Chicago. Then I want to grab the globe and the timeline together and smoosh them together And when I smushed them together, that would then show me on the timeline when it was that the bracelet was in Chicago. And I might see that it was at the Chicago World's Fair in 1933. Then I could take that and throw it back at the museum graphic and see all of the other artifacts that are at the museum that had traveled to Chicago to be exhibited at the 1933 World's Fair.
That's exactly the kind of thing I'm dreaming of. Thanks, Peter. Fabian?
So yeah, personally, I'm down to it. When there is no effort to put in initially, I'm down to pretty much anything as long as it's aligned with my value. So for now, yeah, I'm in. That's interesting for me. It's exploring a world of knowledge. So yeah, definitely interested. I personally will not invest any effort until there is a bit more, let's say, commitment or things like this, because yeah, like everybody else, a few other things to do. And I'm going to sound like an idiot here, but after what is text, I'm going to ask, what's the role of a museum? Because I think a little bit like a library now that has radically changed, now that we can do anything and everything online, and in some ways better, in other way, of course, worse. But I think that begs that question, because I also personally helped a bit the House of European History in Brussels, and we did some photogrammetry of some artifacts.
Oh.
So we can extract, let's say, items out and in pretty good quality, yet in quality that's still usable and manipulatable, including with the Quest. So I know a bit the process, but that brings new opportunity. That, for example, with a virtual museum, you don't have a catalog downstairs that nobody is going to care. You can actually browse through anything and everything. You actually can give it to people so that they can manipulate. You can't do that with a normal piece. So yeah, it really begs that question: what is a museum, and what does this museum wants to do? And finally, for the $500 million, I would suggest, well, there is the Assassin's Creed team, the video game, not necessarily for the game itself, but there are some videos about historians reacting to Assassin's Creed, so that they can give this perspective. Say, oh, this type of column for those kind of temples, that's not the right era. Or the opposite. It's actually pretty positive most of the time, because I think what would be a mess would be to the one thing that VR can do really well is to throw you in a crazy in another environment. Let's say compared to AR, you put the headset, you're somewhere else. And it means when I was a kid in Bretagne, the city where I come from, we have a medieval fair, but actually the whole town, it's a tiny thing, 10,000 inhabitants, but the whole town becomes, we're thrown back in time, and you can decide who you want to be. You can be somebody, you can be a beggar on the street, you can be the king, or you can be like building or riding horses or whatnot, but you're really thrown back in time. So it's kind of impressive. And I think that's really one of the biggest value of VR. It's cheap to go back in time or to be a king or a queen or a beggar, or whoever you want to be. So I think that that's probably one of the most natural way to do it. How can you be somebody else in another social context, economical context, etc., but not in a game way, not Assassin's Creed, but in a way that you learn. Because in Assassin's Creed, you get points for basically killing people. I mean, it's a bit of a shortcut, but it's not much deeper than this, as far as I can tell. So yeah, what's the kind of knowledge you would get out of actually being a pharaoh, let's say, and how that can be done through the knowledge that is out of the museum.
Yeah, that part of being there is absolutely phenomenal. And also, in a way, it is very, very obvious. And I think it should absolutely be supported. I think people are interested in the metaverse should build that. Absolutely wonderful. You asked, what is a museum in VR? And I'm really interested and glad to hear you have real experience of that. In this case, the museum itself, I'm not very interested in. I'm interested in what I currently call the Augmented Room, whatever we end up calling it. Because if you have in that room, you have a timeline, you have a map table type thing, you have opportunity for not one, but several murals, images, you have a way to get in and out of traditional documents. Then we are talking about the stuff we've talked about in general. It's just that we're being given a case study. So the fact that it happens to be about Egypt is almost irrelevant, because all the problems we might solve about how the map connects to the timeline and all of this stuff should be transferable to other knowledge. And that is why it's so important to me that there are no limits in the sense of what data is accessible. You know, when you do the timeline, like I said, you should be able to go down back a couple of million years. It shouldn't be only what the museum wants to show. The museum shows a curated bit, but if it's on Wikidata or whatever open data, put it in there. So it becomes essentially it could, okay, so imagine if we actually got some funding to get some actual programming time done and actual time thinking. Imagine in a year launching this thing. We all agree it could be quite amazing, right? Because we focus on.
No, I'm not inspired at all yet. I was going to say we all agree when I'm here. I think it sounds an awful lot like wanking with data, sorry. The whole put something on a timeline, put something on a map, it's like, I do not need to put on a headset and go to a room for this. I can do that with a web browser. I do not need to do my stupid Billy Bouquet Dick bad movies, waving my hands around and throwing things to get them on timelines. I can click. And I am just, I mean, I do not understand the need for any of this yet. And I am friendly, critical friend rather than trying to shoot it all down. But all I'm hearing is taking time and location data and making a really inconvenient user interface to it.
Right. Okay. So
Well,
since you are,
everyone will go wow, and then kids will mess around for it for 5 minutes and go to the next room, unless you can do something where you can actually generate new understanding. And you've missed something here, which made me annoyed, which is, you said, I don't care what a museum is. The museum and a collection or an archive are different. The museum is there for public understanding. And it's not the same as saying, here is the data. It is a curated collection. It's a bit like the difference between a dictionary and a novel.
yeah, but hang on, Chris, if you, okay, two things. If you guys had actually read the document I sent, while
I was at work this morning.
Yeah, no, I know. Hey, I didn't mean it like a slight like that, but there is a part of it in there that does have a guide, you know, so you can say, what is this? And then there is a curated guide that says, in the context of the museum, this is so and so. So it's a little bit of a series, which is why I'm hoping Adam may join us, the other Adam. So yes, I mean, not everything was in here, but when it comes to the other thing, and again, for the rest of the community, Chris and I are actually very close friends, so please ignore our tone at the moment. Because you haven't used an Oculus lately, the previous VR, I think, is not very relevant. So you are a little bit not feeling the same thing, because one thing that was done in the community, first by Brandel and then by Adam, we took one of Bob Horn's murals, as in they did, put it in a room that had nothing else in it. And all you could do in the first iteration, you could pull it towards you and move it about. That in itself, without anything fancy, is absolutely effing mind-blowing. Because if you had really meant what you said in the beginning of this, which is what I believe my entire life until January, you would be walking around with blinkers, right? I have a 13-inch monitor. I know it works and so on, you can have bigger monitors. But the difference between having this worldview and having the entire thing, it is so different. You have to feel it. And what I'm talking about, Mark Anderson, who's not here right now for whatever reason, he got annoyed with me and felt that the document I wrote was full of hyperbole. I don't know what he meant by that, and I'd like to understand. But the point is, at this stage, all we're trying to do is just throw all kinds of dreamy things. And Chris, I am very glad you're here, because your perspective of once we have some dreamy things, a lot of it will be wanky bullshit, there's no question. But I don't think we're at the stage of filtering that out yet.
I think, yeah, it feels like what will look cool to investors, not what will actually help people generate new understanding. And I think that for me is what the whole point of something like this should to get it well. And it's potentially one of those things where one person in the right place at the right time will make all the difference, because you can have all of the technology and garbage in, garbage out. So I think it's worth almost coming up with how does someone go, I've never seen it from that perspective before. And for me, that's the thing. How do you give someone a perspective that they couldn't get without this?
Fabian, I see your hand, but just a little more jousting with Chris.
No, I'm happy to.
One of the things, that I came up with in my fantastic imagination, I say in quotes and joking, walking into a timeline, suddenly you're there. You can see the stage of the pyramids right there. Not every step of the timeline, only curated little dots, right? You can't do that anywhere else. And the whole thing is, why does a museum exist? It's to go and see stuff. This allows you to go and see stuff in many, many different contexts. And this goes back to the text question, to then produce a knowledge artifacts which you can share with other people. There will be a PDF at the end of it. Fabian, take over before it says too much nonsense.
It's so yes, if it's I don't know how you say it, Chris, the data wonking or something like this. Yeah, it's not worth it. But also, I want to say this. I think there is huge opportunity, and also regardless of being Egypt or another, it doesn't matter so much. But I was just this weekend at an exhibit here in Brussels on Aboriginal art from Australia called The Before Time Began. It was a beautiful exhibit. It was very well organized. It was quite interesting, but it was also so damn boring. It was also so nothing special. The artifacts was there. The creation, I'm sure, was amazing. I don't even have the knowledge to judge it, to be fair. It was quite interesting, but it felt, when I know that the tools we have, or the toys, or however you want to call it, the information we have, let's say on Wikidata or Wikipedia, it was disgusting in a way. It was excellent, but it was poor. It was not good enough. And I say this also with the $500 million, the amount mentioned initially, because I know the museum there, the entrance was like 21 euros, something like this. Was expensive, but nothing crazy. And I know I did not go, let's say, at the end of my visit to talk to the curator of the museum to propose my skill, because I know if I propose my skill, I need to propose a bill. And I know that, for example, doing the photogrammetry or doing the programming, all this, it is quite expensive, and you need a proper team. It's not just like a 5 minutes game or something. And so it's very involving. So I have this kind of tension between the potential, the goal, the mission, what could be done, but somehow we don't. And one of the biggest bottleneck, let's say we have Wikidata, for example, and we have the timeline. All this is easy. I mean, it's not easy, but we can do it, no problem. But what's usually the bottleneck for all of this kind of project are 3D models. Most places don't have 3D models. And we get stuck in 2D, we get stuck in text, we get stuck maybe in video, but in actual 3D, we have to force it out, and we can pull it extruding, but it's ugly. So that's why I mentioned Assassin's Creed. It's just one example of a historically inspired, let's say, video game, is because I think in terms of assets, in terms of production, in terms of skills, that's kind of the place to be. If tomorrow you tell me, oh, you're in charge of the project and you to lead it, that's the team I would want. They don't necessarily have the same view on what text is or our perspective, but in terms of managing a library of 3D assets, generating it and creating it, I think that would be the way. And then again, the answer a bit to Chris's point on, and then what do we actually learn from it? But I think that's where I would see the value of the museum and its curators, is how can we actually go from somebody, an imaginary visitor, let's say, who knows very little, some connections to this or that topic, to actually becoming an expert in the field. It's a bit idiotic to say, but I think that's kind of the goal. If you go to the museum, you want to learn about the topic. You're not going to become an Egyptologist in a 3-hour session, but yeah, how can we raise, let's say, that?
I'll I don't know if anybody else is about to talk, but I'll just go on the record. Could go on. I could go on and on as to the factors, but personally, I think it's a distraction.
What is?
Trying
What?
to pitch and create a VR museum solution for some of the reasons that were already listed, but I don't know. I think that the idea, the imagined solution experience sounds great, but the getting to there actually involves a whole lot more than even just the technology, right? So it's a thing that if it were seriously considered by the group, I do think it would be a distraction. I don't think that, I think it could be a one or the other kind of situation.
A distraction from what, Alan?
Distraction from what is currently being worked on, and I don't just mean in the sense of the demo, I don't mean in the sense of deliverables, I mean trying to unpack a core problem that is of interest to the people who are on the call. And then from there, sort of working out to something that is closer to a product is an entirely different mindset than pitching to try and make a museum type experience and everything that's involved there. It just seems like they don't overlap. And I know that there's a whole lot more to the museum as far as like the requirements that would be, the team that would be needed, the time that would be needed,
I find
yeah,
it
it just seems like.
Okay, I find it really difficult, the dialogue in the group, because we meet twice a week, which is quite a lot, of course. But then, people come in and out as we can, and there's very little, other than posting some things on Twitter, interaction in the meantime. For instance, the document that I wrote about this, not a lot of people have had a chance to read it, fair enough. But, when you say this, Alan, I'm not talking about going in and reproducing just a museum. That's kind of obvious. They can do that if they want to. I don't think they need us for that. But what I call the augmented room basically has all the elements we've been discussing since January. The only difference here is that instead of us flailing about what the topic, the use case is about, it's someone learning the history of Egypt. So I think it actually solves all our problems. Instead of being general, it's specific. And it has this.
Okay, that's fair. I haven't read the document that you sent, so I was just giving you my impression from what I've been hearing, but I'll read the document. If it does line up, then I'm all for it, because
well, the thing is, your concern, just like Chris, you're being negative from a very interesting and intelligent perspective, because even when I talk to Ismail, he's talking about, intellectual property and what the museum wants and all of that stuff. What we want is to augment people learning, solving problems, and thinking. That's not necessarily the same as the museum. So it is kind of a sneaky way of trying to do both. And you may be right. It may be that the museum only wants something very specific, and this augmented room may not be amazing.
I'd like to make a couple of points about museums in general. I've noticed that they're having something of an identity crisis, and it goes back quite some time. Back in, I think, the early 1990s, I saw the first instance of it at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And there was an exhibit called Expedition. And it was supposed to capture all the excitement of museum exhibition, studying things. But it started to get contemporary politics injected into the exhibit, and it started to lose touch with reality. And the example is, they had a little theater, and it had the story of the Meeps Island flying frog. And you went into this little theater and you sat down, just basically a little round cylinder walled off section of the museum floor with enough seating for maybe 20 people to be sitting. And you watched a little video, and the video started telling the story of Meeps Island, which was somewhere off the South Carolina banks. And someone who traveled to the island discovered these wonderful flying frogs. And they had this exciting theme song: frogs in the air, frogs in the trees, frogs a flapping in the breeze. It's the Meeps Island flying frog. And everybody's getting all excited about that. They told the story about how some developer wanted to come and build an amusement park on the island that would have destroyed the frog's habitat, and how they were able to get emergency legislation slipped through. You go through this whole thing, and they save the frogs at the end. You think, oh, wonderful. And as I'm exiting the theater at the end of the presentation, I noticed this little plaque on the side with some small print. And the small print was, this is actually a representation of a composite of the experiences of many different endangered species. There actually is no Meeps Island flying frog, but it's representative of the general area. But that was just like a little backdoor footnote that 90% of the people going through that exhibit wouldn't have seen. More recently in New York City, we've had exhibits on, the science of Star Wars. And I'm sorry, there was no science. It was pure BS. The museums, at least the ones in New York City, I can't speak for the rest of the world, and hopefully Cairo hasn't gotten onto this slippery slope, but the museum staff start to see their job as being an entertainment institution and not an educational institution. So they'll bring in all these bogus exhibits with just the most tangential connection to the underlying subject matter, because in their minds, they don't think that reality is interesting enough for the museum patrons to be able to generate sales. So you come in, you get, animated dinosaurs, and the dinosaur models are cool, and they generate a lot of, come to the Boston Museum of Science to see the dinosaurs, but the dinosaur models aren't accurate according to the latest understanding of what dinosaurs are. One good thing in VR, we can update those models on the fly as we learn new things about them. But when you had giant pneumatic animated T-Rexes stretching their head around with roaring sounds that were lifted from lions and slowed down slightly with some sound effects, and I didn't even bother to tell you how they did the sound effects to do it. You're just supposed to imagine that you saw what dinosaurs looked like when you really didn't. Same problem down at Epcot Center at Disney World. It was originally conceived to inform, entertain, and inspire, were the three planks of Epcot. And then Disney Company, about halfway through, I guess maybe it was the 90s-ish, they started bringing in cartoon characters to boost sales, and they totally jettisoned the educational mission. And instead, now you have Guardians of the Galaxy roller coaster rides being put in. And the Living Seas was a wonderful pavilion. Originally, it was just an aquarium and a representation of what a future Sea Base Alpha might look like. And then they replaced it with Nemo and Friends. So you had a real aquarium with
Peter,
animated
we
fish.
get the
Everything's
point,
going
but
to
it's
pure
not,
entertainment, and it's terrible.
yeah.
If we can do anything to get things back to be more grounded in reality and seriousness, it would be a tremendous service to all of humanity.
Right. Okay,
But the museums themselves are in a crisis, and they need to do a serious re-examining of what their purpose is.
yeah, that's a fair point, absolutely.
Okay, off of my soapbox.
Yeah, Fabienne. Chris, you have to click the button with the hand thing.
I'm ahead of you, Chris, there. So I think one way maybe to answer Alan's warning that we might be led astray to something interesting, but that's not the core of this group, is also what we would delegate. Let's imagine that we get such a project. We might not want to do everything. We might not want to do photogrammetry. We might not want to program some games, or I don't know what. So I think that's another way to answer it, is what would be the core differentiating value that this group would provide compared to the team that made Assassin's Creed or another one who'd made whichever museum is next to you. Beside the love of text, besides some understanding of the value of it, and maybe the value of text in VR, I think that might help. Because I think, to be honest, that even if there is such a proposal made and it doesn't go anywhere, it might still ask the right question. So it might be indeed a good exercise, and the topic indeed not necessarily the point. But yeah, what would be the actual added value of manipulating text in VR, or having a timeline, or things that a typical game studio who would take on such a job would not care about, for example. Maybe that's another way to see it.
I mean, yeah, Chris, just on that point, Fabian, let's put a pin on that and have a proper discussion of what we would do different. So Chris, please go, but Fabian, definitely thinking about what you said.
Okay, so as I say, I still think at all times anything with new tech has to be more than shiny, and it's how I think the key thing is how to do something at least as good as without it, not just whiz bang. But there's a couple of things that randomly that I've thought of while we're talking about this, and I'm just going to, because I just randomly will fire off anytime someone says something with that. Oh, one is we have a researcher called Kurt Martinez who does stuff about 3D imagery of historical items, specifically that are too expensive to let anyone touch or mess with very much, and he puts them under a dome and photographs them with light from every cardinal angle in such a way they can then recreate it. So you can basically walk up to it, have it on a computer screen and move a light around and get a strong sense of a 3D shape of something like a stele or something like Stella, the big engraved things from Egypt and things like that. So he might be a fun person to talk to because he's got a lot of experience in computer science and museums and digitizing the 3D digitizing old master paintings and things like that, and the issues around giving a computerized experience to things that are more than an RGB scan of a flat surface. But the second one was thinking about ways you can get 3D in value in other ways. And one of the things I've heard of being done is doing the opposite of virtual reality, and that is using 3D models to print off things to hand to a child so that there's no way they can touch the original, but here's the shape of the thing. Like here's the one in the cabinet that you can't touch, but this is ideally the weight as well, and like, oh, you see how that bit goes into there and things. But the other one, and this is slightly more meta, was you were talking about seeing related data, and I think in history one of the most interesting things is, but what else was going on? Because you tend to study things, and most people study things in a little unit, and you do your unit of history, and you do the Second World War, or you do the First World War, or you do this periods and places, and that's not what history really is. It's all of those things interacting with each other over time. And for me, one of the most fascinatingly odd things I once found out was that Deadwood and the kind of classic era of the Wild West and Bill Hickok and the whole cowboy legends are contemporary with the time the Sherlock Holmes novels were set. And this may sound stupidly obvious, but they're two different worlds. Even though Sherlock Holmes is fictional, the London he lived in was the London of when the Wild West was happening. And for me, that kind of understanding, and I never really learned American history except in units because I'm British. And so understanding how the Wild West led to the First World War is like this huge gap in my, it's a big gap in my understanding. And World War I is the modern era and the Wild West is the olden days. There's only about 30 years between them, and I've lived longer than that now. And understanding that there were people from the Wild West who were in the First World War and things, and that connection is something I think you could do with letting people explore, scratch an itch and go and look, and being able to go off-road is effectively in history is really interesting by being what other things are going on. And the final thought I had was you're talking about things and almost having a lens. So being able to look at that, you're looking at something through the perspective of the economic view, but what is the this or this case? And there's lots of different elements to history that are all interacting.
Chris, yes, sorry, absolutely. That's the key thing, and that's why I said in the beginning that the museum is allowed to curate the basic timeline, but you should be able to bring in absolutely any available data that you can, so that you can do exactly that. So thank you for highlighting that crucial bit. Bob, do you want to do yours, or should we address the point that Fabienne brought up? Where do you want to be in the sequence? The question was what?
I've been let's see if I got, yeah, got my, I've been, my internet has been down, so let Fabian go ahead. I'm not sure that I'm, relevant at the moment.
Right, okay, so the question Fabian asked was, what would we offer that isn't just a game studio, what they would offer, or a VR company or a scanning company or something like that? Is that right, Fabian? Right, so when I wrote, yeah, so when
I'll talk to that.
Okay, yeah, please do. And also write to that or demo to that or image to that, because when I wrote the thing that I wrote, I tried to go into dream mode and not just be about everything has to be about visual meta or any of that nonsense. Of course, there are aspects of that. So I probably underplayed what we do in this group, which is about text. But, having worked on these different documents, which you may consider fluff or not over the last few months, problems become more and more apparent. So if we choose an aspect of this, and I think, for instance, if we choose only to make the most incredible timeline, and then maybe a map later, and then the most rudimentary access to academic documents in and out, just that would be amazing. We should, as a community, choose what to focus on. There's no question about that. We can't do everything. I mean, right now, I think it's good to dream about everything, but we have to decide where we're going to go. And I really think that where we are different, what? Peter, no, we're not going to have a command line interface in VR. Go and get an Oculus. Just no, young man, no. Anyway, we do have to agree. Well, I mean, as an additional thing, yes, but oh God, so many things going on here. Yeah, okay, Bob.
Well, first, I'd appreciate you sending me the document. I'm looking over the computer, that down. I couldn't find, your message. It may have, I don't know. So second thing, I've done 3 different major arrangements of and analyses of text which have become useful to people. So sometimes in some of them, several 100,000 that we can document because they paid for it. And the reason that I found that we made progress was to work on some subject matter. So the subject matter itself doesn't matter so much because subject matters are pretty much the same around the world at one level of abstraction and analysis. But when you actually work on a subject matter like Egyptian history, you get all the challenges or many of the challenges that you will need to face in any subject matter. And to work, actually working on it is the actual getting started. And I think the other thing that it's wonderful. This conversation is wonderful in the sense of visioning, but to me, one has to realize that we're not going to do everything at once. We're gonna start with one thing, maybe a timeline's a good one to start with. Or maybe something else, maybe a document that the museum produces. Maybe it's all the little messages next to all the objects in the museum, for example, is another set of text that one might start with to learn how to manipulate them in virtual reality. So let's real, and we don't know which order is best. We just got to get started, and then that's and it's having this data that and I have to if I sound a little urgent, is I'm facing this same thing in another project. I can't get people to actually work on a subject matter. It's taking me 2 months to get that to happen, to even get started on it, because then we learn things. from trying to do something with it.
Yeah, Bob, I so wholeheartedly agree with you. And Raphael, I see your hand. So on this subject, can we think about this till Friday? And if we come back on Friday and we say, even if just thinking in the back of my head, I've decided this is absolutely wrong, fair enough. It's been a week of thinking. But at the same time, if you do have the time and interest just to write a paragraph or to mock something up, and then we can start fighting over what aspect we think we should work on, that I think might be very productive. And Alan, do you agree that if we take an open approach and focus on the interactions, the tools, and the knowledge generation, the fact that it is about Egyptian history is a nice added bonus rather than something that could pull us down a rabbit hole? Alan, what do you think? Okay, Alan's making coffee. Raphael, over to you.
Okay. Let's see, where do I begin? I agree with Bob. I think getting started taking the first step is usually the hardest one, but after that, we start to gain momentum on things. And thinking about VR and Egypt, I think thinking about the architecture of the space is where things start to have a lot of possibilities. And when I talk about the architecture, I'm talking about the VR architecture of where we're going to be inside. I think that's more important than thinking of the macro interactions, like how do I see this file or this picture or this map or this timeline? Because if people are going to be in this environment, then the environment takes more importance than the interactions. And from architecture, just being in a space, thinking about the Library of Alexandria or these grandiose architectures, the architecture by itself puts you in a mood and in a feeling and a way of interacting with things. So I think the environment we create is as equal or more important than the content that is within it. Because if we're creating VR for this huge place and we have something that it's underwhelming, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the archive. So I think the architecture is something that has to be thought about. And I wanted to quickly, Fred, if I could have 5 minutes, it has to do with text and VR and things we were talking on the email. I have a couple of slides here that I just wanted to show this quick concept that I thought about. Okay, let me share my screen. So it's quite simple, but it requires a different kind of method of thinking. But we already have the base to understand it. So it has to do with the idea of equipables, and this is taking directly from games. So basically, if we accept that everything is text, even photos, videos, songs, apps, everything ends up being text as a foundation. We start to think of text as building blocks that you can use as a foundation and build upon. So here, this is a very quick example of a game called Diablo 3. And the first image on the left, this is my character, and you can see it has a power of 1,517. And it has no equipments in it. So I'm not using anything. And as I go to the right, I start equipping these different items, which makes my character stronger. So right here, I have 4,500, and then the next one, I have 6,600. And it goes all the way up to the max where I have, this complete set of equipments, and my character is very strong. And based on the basic character, my character is 10 times stronger. It's still the same character, but using these different equipments, my character gets stronger and stronger. So if we think about text as the base, and we can equip things to text to make text stronger, better, augmented, whatever word you want to call it, we start to get new possibilities for text. So in this case, in Diablo 3, I can have 7 pieces of equipment that make medium change to my character. I can equip 4 accessories that give small changes, and I can equip 2 weapons that give me big changes. So if we think in context of text, small changes to text would be maybe a change of font, a little bit of metadata, author info, a cover, things like that. Medium changes, the things that we discuss on a weekly basis here. And the big changes are things like the text knows about itself, or GPT-3, you can generate text, based on different algorithms that you define. So if we think of a text file as the base plus these extensions, augmentations, enhancements, plugins, add-ons, whatever you want to call it, it's things that you add on to the base text, then we get a packaged file. So this packaged file would work like a Mac application, where a program is a package, and inside the package, you have all of the contents of that package. So when we think about text, this package will contain instructions on how the text will behave depending on the context that the text is going to be inserted. And it also separates content from presentation. It's non-destructive to the text. The .txt is still the foundation, and it's going to open differently based on the app. So if you open a text in VR, it's going to open one way. If you open the same text package in Word, it's going to open the way Word wants it to work, because the first line, it contains instructions on how to behave based on the context. And you can also have different layouts. So maybe this package that contains the text can be visualized in a book form, or in a web format, or in a printable format. And we can also have different display options in this text package that can have different languages, different colors, different fonts. And the package can also be collaborative and non-destructive. So I can have annotations, highlights, and comments. And since this is a package, I'm not having this highlight or this highlight. I'm having this highlight and this highlight. It just keeps complementing. So I'm able to collaborate on this package with other people and have, Frode's annotations or Adam's annotations. And all of this complements the base, which is text. So this is a different idea that I thought about when we think about text, because it from the way that I'm thinking about this, it solves a lot of the problems that we have based on either applications or different environments or formats or collaboration. If we start thinking of add-ons that we add to text, then we're able to grow text based on any kind of either industry or platform or environment that text is supported. And since text is the base of everything, it makes sense to have a packaged format for text. And the way to go about this would be, having a kind of a parsing language that we can give instructions to the text on, for example, if the title on page 2 is bold, I'm not adding a bold formatting to the text. I'm giving instructions to make the text bold in that specific word. So it's the main text file is unchangeable. It's always going to be that. But whatever changes you make in this, it's going to generate a separate file that will live in the package with instructions to change the text, the base text. So that's what I had to share really quickly.
Opens up a lot of interesting questions. I think we'll need to chew on that for a bit. There's been a comment from Chris in the text chat already. Fabian,
so hypercard. I love hypercard, Christopher.
That is definitely not a bad comment. But yeah,
I'm too young to remember hypercard.
No one's.
That is true. That is true. And I guess Christopher doesn't know about my main project, but once I found out about HyperCard, I discovered that what I'm doing nowadays has been done, you know, when I was born.
Yeah, over to you, Fabienne, while we consider what Raphael has presented.
So two quick things. Froids know that and others know that, but I don't have a Mac. So that's my immediate comment. So I can't get excited because it sounds like I couldn't participate. I'm not saying it's not possible to do otherwise, but I think every time we do this, even if it's just an example, then it means maybe other people can't get excited. And to my bigger point is also I have a bias. So I joined here because of, or thanks to Brandel, but like me, he tends to be web-based first. And it's also a perspective that I think we had a few times that, and it's I don't know if it's normal. We tend to think of files and files with an operating system. But I think a lot of things, I don't want to say most, but a lot of the tasks we do are web-based. And it doesn't mean all of this could still be compatible by being a web application or multiple web application or running on different servers. But it's just, yeah, same. It's how easily can it be imagined or thought of as a web-based thing? And also because if it's web-based, there is no OS-specific limitation. So that's my immediate reaction. And something maybe a little bit deeper is last week or 2 weeks ago, I don't know, we started to discuss briefly about Code Mirror, which is a web-based programming editor. It's mostly targeting programmers, but it's a bit like Visual Studio Code. But the nice thing is it's quite extensible. So it has widgets, for example. You can select a type of code or with a type, and then you can have a widget too. I'm wondering how, or if the widget view could be thought of as equipables. Yeah.
Yes. A quick comment on that, Fabian. I didn't mean to pose this as a Mac way of doing it. I'm web first as well. You can think of this as like an alternative, I guess. If HTML is the structure or the content, even before HTML, you have text, and then text. HTML would be an add-on to text, and then CSS would be an add-on to text, and then JavaScript would be an add-on to text instead of a language by itself. So you could think of it as web-based if you just think of separating the structure. Even HTML is a structural language. If you separate HTML from the content itself, it's something that attaches to text instead of becomes an HTML file.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very interesting discussion, obviously related to Markdown and formats, a lot of other things. Just to make it really, really clear for the community, I think we agree. I most certainly think that the work we do has to be open, all of it. I happen to own Reader and Author. Sorry, it is Mac native, but that's my tiny little loss-making commercial side of things. All the document formats, all the standards have to be open. And I think that even if we were to do this pitch to the Egyptian museum people, we have to make it clear that it is 100% web-based. And if they want to start owning stuff, we will just have to explain to them why that is a very, very bad idea. Most of the information about these artifacts are readily available anyway, and they really should contribute to an open thing. The reason I'm so excited about this, one of the first Futures of Text, which I held at the university where I was a teacher with Vint Cerf, he came to London. I had an argument and a kind of a rap battle between the British Museum's Egyptologists and Sumerian experts who were arguing where writing first appeared. And it looks like writing could maybe first have been Upper Egypt, tiny little tags on cloth to say what they were, basically what you'd find in a supermarket today. It seemed to be the earliest writing. So when I look at this museum, I look at the history of text, and I think that, we're not going to create some little sculpture for them. Not at all. This has to be a web-based thing that can inspire the future. So if they do go with us, their marketing, their presentation should be that they support an open web They don't want to have a lockdown metaverse thing. They have to be aligned with our values. That was a very good point, Fabian, you brought up. That is absolutely core to this. I know you were talking about what Raphael was talking about, but as a reflection of our greater work as well. Alan, are you with us?
I am.
Okay, so earlier I asked you the question, you seem to have gone away to make coffee or something, about, I think it was you who asked somebody asked the question, if we do this Egyptian stuff, what do we bring that a normal games or VR company wouldn't bring to the table? Do we all agree that we can spend till Friday thinking about that, thinking about an aspect that we think we should work on? Because maybe
I'll read the email that you sent about it. I will just be transparent that it would take quite a bit to change my mind that I think this is a distraction. Even if it lines up as the room as you described, the advantage of the things that we're doing or that the developers have been doing is that we have complete control over the kind of data, the kind of interaction, what it does best. That's completely malleable. What you do here is unintentionally, or very likely, there are, I'm sure, cases where it doesn't happen, but very likely you wind up realizing months later that you've actually made somebody else the boss of you, right? And now you're no longer doing the thing that you wanted to do and explore because that doesn't line up, right? So I'll read it, but that's kind of my concerns.
I think with your experience, it's a very valid and very real concern. And I think that if we give ourselves this week to dream and forget everything you just said, just for 1 week. Yeah, but seriously, you know, to try to dream without reality and constraints is really hard. But if we can manage it this week, come together on Friday, see if we have some good things, put it up against the wall. But yes, you know, I can see that this suddenly could become, we're just another design studio building them a shiny gizmo. And Christopher's earlier comments can be absolutely apt as well. Yes, I can see that. So if we decide that this is for us, it would have to be very clear in what way we would do it and how it would work, and what they would own, what would be open, and so on. So, yeah. Fabian?
Yeah, I don't want to be part of this. I'm fine being part of a studio, but if this studio is, let's say, about augmented text or the future of using VR, AR tools to think and to manipulate and information and text better, but that's not. I don't think there were a lot of studios doing that. But again, yeah, goes back to what's the core of both this group and then this potential exercise. Very naively, it reminded me of an experience I had as a kid. I had like little stamps for hieroglyphs, and I could write hieroglyphs with just stamping on a piece of paper. And that was a pretty good memory. And that's also was prompted back by our initial discussion on what is text. Are hieroglyphs organized together in a cartouche, a kind of text? Is it not? And I thought, I'm afraid that might be too much studio based, but carving through the stone, those hieroglyphs, or being able to pull hieroglyph out of a wall to get the meaning out of it. There are quite a few things there, but then again, is it too specific? Do we want to become, is it an actual pedagogical tool, or are we going to teach people how they could be, how you say, researcher that are trying to uncover a mystery and maybe learn about the society? Is it just a prompt? I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. Really cool. So the way that I'm looking at it is, I mean, first of all, we're at a very strange point in history. You know, we have a war in Europe. You know, I have people staying with me from the war in Europe and, you know, getting the stories every day. And the weather is really nice here in London today, but that's because of bloody climate change. It's really scary what's happening in the poles right now. So, yeah. So we let's be honest, we're trying to save the world, right? At least we're trying to make an effort. There's no question about that. And also, I mean, from my personal perspective, there are a few things in my life that are stressing me beyond belief. So if I'm a little more snappy, I apologize. But the thing is, this Egyptian thing, what it has given me, and I hope it gives you the same, is the opportunity to dream really far. Because what you just said there, Fabian, may be stupid. It may be genius. Right now, we don't know. You know, does it address what Chris talked about? Does it actually help people understand? Maybe it turns out yes. And I mean, like this book here that we keep holding up, maybe the act of actually doing those rubbings helps, maybe not. And I don't think we're at the stage now where we should decide. I think we should just think of crazy stuff. Like I was pretty pleased when I had the thought of you walk into the timeline mural and you end up in that place. I thought that was pretty neat. Right? To me, that's like a wow, wouldn't have thought of it earlier kind of thing, right? Is it going to be useful? Maybe. Maybe the interaction is wrong. Maybe it's not feasible. I don't know, et cetera, et cetera. The way we throw things back around in the room, the way we have lines, it may get messy so quickly that it's just stupid. I don't know. But the fact that it is for an Egyptian collection, and forget the museum, because Alan is right. Forget the people sitting there, forget all of that stuff. But just the fact that we have a space and a time that is our initial focus. You know, I know that this group will have really, really interesting insights. I mean, look at Peter. He said we should have a command line interface in VR. A lot of what Peter says, and I say it with love, Peter, it sounds ridiculous to begin with. It takes me roughly 3 to 6 months, and then I understand what you're saying, right? So that is a real honest compliment. And look at Adam putting on Twitter weird little foldings of the map that it looks like a string falling down for a timeline. You know, there's so much unique thinking here. And none of us are thinking metaverse and how can we meet our friends better. None of us are thinking about how we can reload our virtual rifle better. So that's why I hope we can really spend some time on fantasizing about, you know, Fabian, I haven't even thought about hieroglyphics, hieratic and hieroglyphic writing in itself, the reasons behind them, the history, the usage, absolutely phenomenal degrees of that. All I hope is that when you leave this room as a human, in the future, you can take something with you that is both frozen flat nonsense, PDF or whatever, and you go into another room and it's just as alive. Because, you know, what Chris's point about we don't want some whiz-bang demo, I completely understand that. But, you know, he is sitting in a room that has pictures on the wall, and these pictures have meaning. You know, the way you lay out the room has meaning. Chris, either you come up to London this week or I'm coming down to Southampton. I'm going to strap a headset to you. Raphael, I sent you an email regarding this. Peter, I've sent you an email earlier. We need to have the same experience as Bob. Have you bought your Oculus headset yet?
No, I've got too many other things to do right now.
Why don't you just check with your friends if you can at least borrow one? Because if you spend half an hour inside, I think that's actually enough.
Yes, I'm sorry, just to interrupt. I've done that a couple of times, which is I got a courier, send my headset to a friend on the other side of town, got it back the next day. You don't need it for more than, let's say, even half an hour or an hour. It's just enough to get a sense of it, and a courier does it pretty quick, conveniently.
Yeah. I mean, Adam, you got it in the cutest way. You got it when when you saw the Edgar video, didn't you? By the way, I just have to read something really brief from Edgar's teacher today, because here it's Lent. So Edgar had to give up things, and Emily's been communicating back and forth with her. So the teacher says, Edgar is the perfect example of a Donhead boy. Donhead is the name of the school. I'm so proud of him. He has a will of steel and a big, kind heart. I've nominated him for the JPP award this term. This is for each boy in the class who exhibits our Jesuit pupil profile characteristic. So he has so many of these characteristics at such a young age. You and Frode must be bursting with pride. Just wanted to tell you. Sorry.
Nice.
It was intent, so it's relevant. So yeah, anyway. Okay, so have we agreed that the Egyptian thing could be a colossal waste of time, or it could be, what is it, that guy, the old guy who said, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I can move the world? It can be one of those, right?
What I think is that I think since I joined, future text discussions and the conversations, we always have a lot of ideas, but it's usually hard to turn them concrete. And if a project like this happens, then it's a way for us to kind of stop dreaming a little bit and create something. Because I think we already have a lot of ideas and a lot of dreams and possibilities, but a project brings us down to earth and to understand, the real context that this is going to be inserted, and trying to create something new for that specific context. So when I see the email and thinking about the interactions in museums, there is a lot of possibilities. I don't think if we put it in a spectrum of like, this is basic text and this is extreme virtual reality, we're not going to be extremely virtual reality. I think we have to find a place in the spectrum that will be useful and it will last quite a while. Because if we develop something that is going to go away in a year, then it's, what a waste of effort and everything. So I would prefer more concrete, less extreme projects that we put something in the world and it lasts for a longer time, rather than try to explore some far-fetched idea that might be incredible. I think small increments work better than big leaps.
Yeah, but then there's the question, was it you, Adam, who asked the question, what is free in VR and what is expensive? Yeah, because that's the funny thing, that things that may seem expensive and difficult suddenly become nothing, and vice versa. Little things become hard to do. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things that one asks here about a concrete, writing a project with a plan, with a proposal, with a budget, and all that sort of thing, is what alternative we have. The alternative we have is going on having discussions like we've been having today and the last 10 years.
Well, I think the discussions have changed since January. And
well, wait a minute. Yeah, of course they've changed. Don't make a stereotype out of my comment.
No, Bob. Look, you're a very valued friend. You're a very valued friend and a very valued member of the community. Absolutely. But what I mean is, there have been quite a few tests and things. So, like Adam, with your mural in VR, this goes into our journal. So I think that when we did the Future of Text symposium before, it was completely open. Anybody say anything, next. Now that we're doing the journal, I think there's some more building. And yes, look, first of all, but no, Bob, this is kind of important. I agree with you. A specific project is absolutely the way to go. There's no question about that. But I do think that because VR is an entirely new medium, it's really nice to see the effort the guys have put into doing stuff that we now have in the journal. So that is very different from how we did it when it was text in any form, I think.
Well, the question is deciding what a group or this group is going to do. Is that a decision that is going to be made? Because then you ask what the alternatives are to such a decision. The decision to start a project,
but Bob,
that's a huge budget. That's the first big question, and then, well, it could be the Egypt one, or it could be something else. And sometimes, if the Egypt one is already got some momentum and maybe some funders and certainly has a great partner in the Egyptian Museum, then you have some advantages for thinking about that alternative. But once you've already made the decision that we're going to start a project. Yes,
but Bob, that is why we're spending this week giving everyone a little bit of breathing space, so we can see on Friday if we feel it's just demo nonsense or if we can do something. So that's what we're doing. There has to be a little bit of this level of consensus building, I think. By the way, I saw the Holo thing here. It reminds me, I had a discussion with Ismail. He asked me about the Hololens versus the Oculus. And of course, the Oculus is $300-400. The HoloLens, the basic one, is $3,500. Of course, the main difference is the Oculus isn't normally all VR. The other one is AR. But because I had issues with HoloLens, I didn't know much about it. But I saw a video on YouTube. They've solved a lot of interesting interaction issues. You know, how to deal with buttons and stuff. So that was, see you later, Alan. So that was actually really, really surprising. So if you guys want to have a look at that, especially you who haven't been in the space for a while, because the issues are not necessarily what we think they are. That's all. Anyway, HoloLens, worth having a look at. Yeah, Fabian.
Worth having a quick look at. So I work a bit with the HoloLens too. It's to be honest, one of the reasons I work with VR is more to be pragmatic. If I could have all the time like very thin glasses that would allow me to do VR or AR on the spot, being able to choose, I would probably do that. But right now, my experience, at least for the last couple of years, and including with like very expensive hardware, is the Oculus is the sweet spot, and VR is a sweet. It's usable today. Honestly, AR for now is a bit gimmicky. I don't want to be too critical about it, but I mostly do VR to prepare for AR in the long term, so that I can go in the park and have, let's say, a conversation with someone while drawing in the air, or I don't know what, or having when I go pick a book at the library and then I have whatever metadata on top. I still want this, but I think this is maybe still 10 years ahead. So my perspective is I do VR today because it's reliable and cheap enough. And the skill set, the overlap is pretty close to AR. So if we prepare some data sets, some experiences, all this for VR, it probably will work for AR with, of course, some adjustment, but it will be the same basis, let's say. There is an overlap big enough. But I personally don't invest too much time in AR because I find it's too finicky, too imprecise, too unreliable, too uncomfortable, and still very expensive for the time being. So I still recommend, of course, like anything, if you can experience it today, please do. I mean, it is worth it. And at least to evaluate, let's say, the marketing gap, because the video that, honestly, I use it pretty much every time as a provocation when I start a discussion with startups or others, that part of my job is to measure bullshit. And when I see so many videos like this, I get excited, and then I try the thing. I'm like, yeah, we're not there yet. So videos is something, but if whatever you have the chance to a friend, a museum, a lab, or whatever, to try these headsets too. But yeah, be prepared that reality is a bit harsher than those videos. It's still worth exploring 100%. But yeah, just want to warn that yeah, it's tricky and it's not yet uncomfortable. It's not yet comfortable rather. So interesting. I also share a video. I forgot, but there was a researcher, I think from Edinburgh, who was doing augmented book cover. So like you have the bookshelf and then you can see metadata while looking at the side of the book. So that was pretty good. But again, to go from there to a pleasant interaction through either a HoloLens 2 or a phone or whatnot is still a couple of years ahead. We have time to be ready for this, I would say.
It was interesting. I didn't think that when you started talking about how you're doing VR to prepare for AR, never thought about it that way, but it does make sense. Because I think AR is the long term and VR is more specific applications. So when Frode says that it's a completely new medium, I kindly disagree, because we've been trying VR in different levels for 30 years, like as the technology has been evolving little by little, Frode, little by little.
Well, I don't agree with you, because first of all, you know, I was doing QuickTime videos when 320 by 240 and 15 frames a second was amazing, right? That is not the same as going to the cinema. The fact that it's frames that change is okay. Well, of course, we're talking to some degree about degrees, but you know, what's the difference between showing one picture and then another one? Once you do it fast enough, you have a movie, right? That's a McLuhan thing. So the quality of something changes. Sorry, the quantity of something changes the quality, right? I will find a way to send you damn headsets, because one of the surprising things about the way it is now, visually, it's still only okay. You can see the little dots, it's a little blurry, all of that stuff, but it's so completely rock solid. And the way, you know, you move your head, every single detail, you really have a sense of presence that was not there in the earlier.
All I want to say, Fred, is that it will continue to get better, and this is not the final version.
No.
And
Raphael,
AR, we can use it on our phones, even with phones from like years ago.
Raphael, can I finish? Please, let me just finish, right? It's really annoying to try to have to sell a whole new thing. I mean, I remember when, okay, since you brought up mobile phones, when mobile phones first came up, a lot of people say, why would you want such an expensive yuppie toy? If it's important, I'll call back, right? That was also a bit of a fight. Now it's normal. To turn this on and switch on some kind of an app for AR, VR, hardly anyone does it. It's just not very practical. But when I'm saying it's a new medium, I'm saying that devices that can do AR or VR in a few years can do both. It's almost the same technology, right? And with the Oculus, you can really feel it because you have the option to have pass-through video at any time. So of course, in many cases, you don't want to be encased in a different environment. I don't think anyone argues that at all. You know, if you can put something on the wall behind you and all these things, of course, that's going to be amazing. There will also be times when you want to be utterly transported, where you want to use everything around you. And the reason I say it's a new medium is because, just as one little example, and this is really quite a bit of a, for me, a bit of a mind F, if you want to use the term, the mural for Bob in VR. If it's static and I walk to it by moving a joystick type thing, I get a bit queasy. My body doesn't like it. But if I pinch it towards me, which is exactly the same thing, I don't feel anything. That's weird. So unless you actually can afford the money to have a room that is only for VR, a lot of VR will be sit down and stand up. And also, you know, to an extent. So there are all these tiny little wrinkles. That's why I mean, it's a new medium. And also, we haven't worked in it enough to make it messy. Like, remember the first Macintosh was immaculate, but you can only have about 5 files on it. So once we really start living and making a mess and doing these things, like some of the stuff that Adam's been putting in the Twitter about folding a map in this specific way, you can't do that with a wall size map, even if it's like a Japanese kind of a folding thing. You can't actually do it. That's what I mean. It is a new medium. You know, the Jaron Lanier a couple of years ago, going into a room and having a cable and all that, it is very, very different. We have to learn this together, and I think this group can do that. So, Raphael, I don't know what my tone of voice is, but I can tell you my feeling. My feeling is frustration because I highly respect you, and what you're saying is exactly what I said until I put the headset on. It's just a different.
All I'm saying that we've been putting goggles and experiencing that environment for quite a while already. This is just another new generation of it. And I mentioned, I prefer to work in the foundation of text rather than the possibilities of text. I think that the foundation of text still has a lot to improve. And in case of this specific project, you know, I would totally work on the content, the information architecture, to then hand off to be explored in VR. But I think, you know, it's separate environments.
Yes, separate environments that have to work together. That is absolutely one of the key things that have to happen. That's something that is just so absolutely important. You know,
and there will, and we will different of us will be working on different aspects of it. I'm not going to be
Exactly.
working on, but I'm going to be working with Raphael on the architect, what he calls the architecture, which I call the structure of knowledge. But I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And maybe others will join us at different times, and we'll feed in to what some of the people are more interested in actually building a timeline that has doorways or windows or slide-ins. I don't know. It's there are different metaphors that I'm thinking about, or even a timeline that has catchers. That will catch you. You're throwing the pyramid at it. There are going to be people working on that. I'm not going to be working on that particularly. I love the concept, but
Yeah.
I'm going to be working on the nature of knowledge and this
And I think
structure.
And I think that's just a closing point is, so when I see projects like that, let's think of the people who are part of the community as different people with different interests that can combine to make something even better. So if there's developers that want to develop the VR part, that's amazing. And then if there's people like me and Bob that are going to be a little bit more backstage structuring the information, that's also incredible. So instead of getting everybody on the same boat for one interest, let's keep people in different boats and then, form an armada of some sorts.
Oh, absolutely. That's really, really important. We have a very different mindset. I see Fabian has got his hand up, but just really briefly, for me, text now is multidimensional. Sometimes we're going to view it in flatland screens, which are really, really important. They're going to remain important, but that is a subset of the full rich environment. Fabian.
So Raphael and Bob, I'm sorry, but I'm going to insist not for VR per se. Honestly, I don't care about VR, and not for the final user. Let's say somebody who would experience, but because I am convinced, and it's just a conviction. I don't have, let's say, proof or data behind it, but that VR itself is a tool that could help to get that structure out. That's my motivation for this. Honestly, that's why I'm here to this chat today, and that's what I work in VR. It's not as a tool to present. It can be as a tool to present. It's been proven there in games and whatnot. That's no question there. But rather as a tool to find the structure in a complex set of information. To me, that's the most interesting. So even if actually, let's say the result would not be in VR, would be, let's say, a flat PDF, but VR were used by you or somebody who works with you in order to help find the structure behind the information, to me, that's the most valuable aspect.
Completely, utterly agree. Adam, I'd like to hear your thoughts, if you don't mind.
On all the topics so far?
Yes, you have 1 hour and 15 minutes worth of topics to cover.
So many quick comments on the subject matter. We have a kind of Egypt versus murals, Bob Horn murals versus other kind of data sets we talked about before. Perhaps even Jamie Joyce. They have made fantastic argument maps that could also be interesting. These are kind of more highly refined objects that are also a bit more intellectual objects that we could work with as well. So it depends on maybe the Egypt exhibition, depending on Ismail and the museum people. Maybe they want it as an introductory guide to the museum in some way, and we may not be able to do the more intellectual things or higher order thinking in there. Maybe we could sneak it in, but it could be a conflict of interest there, or a conflict of Yeah, so I'm interested. I really agree with Bob and Frode that we should pick a subject matter and stick to it. But we have more subject matters available to us, and I think Jamie sounded ecstatic about hearing that we may be able to do something in VR with all the argument mapping, and they have extensive resources as well with video backing material, and so we could do rich things there. So that's an alternative. Yeah, but I read your commentary, Frode, that we could put murals in Egypt as well, or in that exhibition. But if the question is rather, what is the starting point of the main thing? Because one of the major risks with doing a very immersive thing is that just like visualization and interaction, there are so many rich things that lead to nothing, that the experience itself is so rich. I've been fiddling around with many of my prototypes, just fiddling around with them. It's so rich and so interesting to do it, but I don't really learn anything. So yeah, and I think immersive environments are even more dangerous in that sense. There are so many very rich things that leads to nothing. So we need to be twice as or much more focused on the jobs to be done and what you actually get out of it. And I think Chris has been talking about this. What are we actually doing there and learning there? And so we must be. If we work with scientific papers, it's a bit easier. But if we work with rich environments and immersive environments, we have to be even more focused on the job to be done. Jobs to be done. So that was just a few points here. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam.
Can I react to that?
Briefly, we're running out of time, and there's a hand up. But yeah, briefly.
Okay. I agree that argumentation mapping is important. I did the largest and strongest and biggest argumentation map 20 years ago. 800 moves in the argument. Adam, and happy to talk with you about it because I've followed it ever since. And I agree that another subject matter, such as sustainability or climate change, would be better than Egyptology in one sense, in that it would also be addressing the current existential risks to humanity. If we had a funder or a partner in that area and that we could plow ahead on it, I'd be with you on a different subject matter than Egypt, but we have Egypt presented as a possibility. Okay, over to you. Wrote it.
Two quick remarks. And I don't know if all contents is the same. I don't know if, let's say, for our goal for exploring augmented text, if I don't know, a scientific paper or bibliography or bibliometry or Egypt or climate change is the same. If it is, then indeed, if there is a content that is more pressing to us or dearest to us, like climate change, then yes, that would be maybe more important, more exciting, or more exhilarating, or motivate us more. And also, and it's something that's been mentioned a few times with Ismail, is also the partner. There has to be somebody who gets it, somebody who doesn't believe we're a 3D game studio, or somebody who doesn't believe we're, I don't know, doing bibliometry, if that's not what we're doing. So I think if all content is the same, then for who we do it and somebody who really gets our goal is more important. And then the last point is, if it's not, then it's extremely interesting because it means some content is more apt or will better be analyzed, presented, find a structure this way or not. And this is completely, let's say the McLuhan side is this medium really generalist or not? Is it more is it better adapted to some kind of content? I imagine it's generalist, but it might not be it. Maybe it's for specific kind of content. I don't know.
Right. Okay. So I see Peter's funny point about dinosaurs. I mean, I know not everybody is on the same level of scared of climate change as some other ones. Some of us are. I'm shit scared of that. You know, but I'm also sitting in Europe with an active war happening. You know, poverty. There are some real issues. And with all due respect, I don't think any one of us can solve these issues, not that anyone else is saying it. And I also don't think that and I'm not speaking for anyone else, I don't have the expertise to provide a climate experience model interaction system to build. There's been a lot of fantastic work done in that space, but I don't think I could contribute to that. What I think is the most important thing, and what I honestly think this group has the potential to do, to read what I just wrote in the chat, I think the most important mission is to raise the expectation of what it can be to work in VR, AR. Because whether it's large degrees or small degrees, to look at Raphael's point, I come from an art background. I'm an artist. I cannot program to save my life. I'm almost innumerate. There's a lot of things I cannot do. We all here in this group have very different skill sets and minds, which is great. None of us are plain normal people. But when I look back at what happened with, you know, the first Macintosh, I think I mentioned this to some of you. You get word processing in a spreadsheet, and that's about it. We haven't seen hardly anything happen in the last 40 years of computing. You all know some of them, like the web is great and so on. The very fact that we now have this new AR, VR thing, which is going to change, I really, honestly, truly think that instead of just metaverse about chatting with your friends and going to concerts and all of that stuff, which commercial interest will do, I really think we have to raise the bar for you go into a virtual office and, oh my fucking God, I can do this. I can get that insight. I can connect these things. I can manipulate it in this way. That in itself is it. It could be about Lego blocks. I don't give a flying monkey about the subject matter. I really don't. And so I think that if we, in one sense, we're given a gift from this Egypt thing, if it happens. But yes, the concerns that they may want to boss us around and make it into Disney, equally strong concern. Of course it is. But we could, of course, choose to do this Egyptian thing without them. Or pick medieval history, or, you know, the subject matter for me has absolutely no interest. Just being able to show people, sorry for repeating myself, I just really need to hammer this point home. For someone to put on the glasses, go into the space, and to be able to do things that in the physical world we cannot do, and that actually addresses Chris's thing of, is it just a flashy demo? That's it. It's so important, because I think that once that Apple and others produce consumer-friendly headsets that are in wide use, have maybe 1 or 2 years, then human imagination, sorry to swear again, will be fucked. We won't think of it as new anymore. And that's what scares the living daylights out of me. Our human imagination is powerful, but is also very, very limited.
On that excellent note, I need to put on my chauffeur hat and head out with Mom. See you on Friday.
Have a good day, Peter.
Yeah, I've got to leave too.
I'm going to go greet my son, whom I'm so proud of, in a minute. By the way, I watched Hamilton with our Ukrainian family this week. The King's song is Putin. It was really uncomfortable watching, considering one of our friends, her husband, is there. He was the one I thought was there blogging, but of course he wasn't blogging, he was making roadblocks. There was the language issue. So to talk about, you know, yeah, if you haven't heard the King song in Hamilton, now is a
It only took a week, Frode, for you to watch Hamilton again.
I want to watch it because of its emotional beauty, but to see it with these people who are actively in that situation was really insensitive of me, and I didn't actually notice that until halfway through, but they were okay with it. So Yeah, the world is tricky. We got to, here's the thing. This is the final sentence from me. The world is tricky. We need to get a better handle on it. See you Friday,
Yeah.
everyone, I hope.
As long
See
as
you
we
Friday.
try, it's worth it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much for everything today. Very
Thank
good.
you very much. Bye.